Welcome to HLA webinars. My name is Carla Byer-Smolin. I am the National Chapter and Membership Coordinator for HLAA. I'm also your host today. Our presentation today is the rise of automatic speech recognition, also known as ASR, the history, current technologies, and practical tips with guest speaker Linda Kozma-Spytek. I need to share some technical tips for you. The captioning that is being shown today will be the caption that will be provided today. You do not need to enable your closed caption on your webinar bar for this. The captions will be shown on your screen throughout the webinar. We also ask that you please do not use the please use the Q&A button on your webinar screen to ask any questions of Linda throughout the presentation. Please do not use the chat or the raise your hand option. Please enter your question in the Q&A box. We would appreciate your help. With that, I will turn this over to Lisa Hamlin, HLA Public Policy Director, and she will introduce our speaker. Go ahead, Lisa.
Hello all, I hope you're doing well today. It's my pleasure to introduce Linda Kozma-Spytek, who will be doing the webinar today. Linda is a senior research audiologist in the Technology Access Program at Gallaudet University. She also co-directs the Deaf and Hard of Hearing Technology Rehabilitation Engineering Research Center at Gallaudet University, which is funded by the National Institute on Disability, Independent Living, and Rehab Research. Linda's research and development projects include investigating the use of Internet Protocol Caption telephone service, the compatibility of digital cellular telephones and hearing aids, and the accessibility of VoIP VoIP technology in voice, telephony, and applications for individuals with hearing loss. She also serves as the representative for Gallaudet on the Hearing Aid Task Force. Linda is active in standards development and public policy that addresses communication technology and services, and serves as the technical advisor to Hearing Loss Association of America. Gallaudet has partnered with HLA for many years, most recently with Linda at the lead on the NCHAT program and the ICAT projects, both federally funded programs. And I've had the pleasure of knowing Linda since I came on board 10 years ago, and it's been great working with Linda, so I'm going to just turn it right over to her so that she can go forward with the webinar. Thank you, Linda.
Thanks so much, Lisa. It's really great to be here, and I hope that everyone on the webinar is doing well and staying healthy. What I'd like to do is just give you a little bit of an agenda for what we're going to talk about today. It's called The Rise of ASR, and I really was intentional in selecting that title because ASR has become such a powerful, successful, and important technology very recently, in fact. And so it made sense to me that was a good title to use. We're going to talk about what ASR, or automatic speech recognition, is, how it's used, its history, some examples of current technologies for captioning using ASR, practical considerations and tips and questions. And as Carla mentioned, please type those questions into the Q&A box. We'll have about 10 minutes at the end of the webinar to answer those questions, but having them in the Q&A allows us to save those questions that we receive. So if we don't get to answer something, then we can go back to it later. I do want to mention that I'm going to be talking about some products and services, but anything I mention is really strictly to serve as an example. It's not meant to constitute or imply an endorsement. There are going to be alternative products and services to the examples that I provide. The fact that they are not included does not in any way suggest disapproval. So I'm imagining that all of you who are on this have maybe said some of these words. Hey Siri, hey Cortana, Alexa, or hey Google. These are all things that we now say to devices that sit in our homes. They're considered virtual assistants. They're cloud-based devices that use artificial intelligence, and they're integrated into many things. They're integrated into the developers' devices as well as some third-party devices. Siri was really the first voice assistant to sort of come on the scene. It was released by Apple in about 2011, and Google is probably the more recent entrant. It was released by Google, of course, in 2016. I have a funny little anecdote, actually. When I was practicing this talk, I said, hey Siri, hey Cortana, Alexa, hey Google, while I was sitting at my table next to my Google Home Hub, and Google Home Hub responded and said, I'm flattered, but that's not me, in response to me saying the other words. So that was kind of funny. I did not expect that to happen at all. Oops. So I want to talk a little bit about what automatic speech recognition is. And it's really computer hardware systems and software-based techniques to identify and process the human voice. Not necessarily process it to text, but just to process it and identify it. It's known by a lot of different terms. Speech to text is something we probably recognize. Automatic voice recognition, voice to text, speech recognition, all common things that are used to refer to automatic speech recognition, or ASR. Now, how is automatic speech recognition used? Well, it's used for a couple of different purposes. One is to perform an action based on instructions that you as the user define. So when I'm at home and I'm using my Google Hub, I'll say, hey Google, set a 2-minute timer, and it will set a 2-minute timer maybe for something I'm baking. It's performing an instruction that I've defined. Another way that ASR is used is for authenticating users via their voice, much like a fingerprint, only this is also biometric authentication. And finally, the thing that we're really interested in today, and that is using automatic speech recognition to convert words that a person speaks into text. Now, people are generally somewhat surprised when I talk about the history of ASR and say that it's actually 70 years old. Starting in the 1950s and 60s, no surprise, with Bell Laboratories and IBM having machines actually being able to recognize isolated numbers and words, so something extremely sensitive. By the 1970s, the US Department of Defense, probably no surprise there, becomes interested and active in this area. And the number of words that ASR engines are able to recognize increases into around 1,000 words. That's about the vocabulary of a 3-year-old child. The 1980s brings about some new models of speech recognition. So these are mathematical algorithms that start to be used. We're not just looking at the physical properties of the speech anymore. There are other things that are considered in these algorithms, and we start to be able to recognize even more words, thousands of words, and most importantly, we're able to start to recognize continuous speech. In the 1990s, some of you might know Drag and Dictate. I believe it's actually around still today by a company named Nuance. And this was really a consumer product that was available for automatic speech recognition. It was the first commercial ASR system. And it really came about at the same time as the advent of personal computer use. The 2000s saw a really big jump in the ability of automatic speech recognition engines to recognize things. And in part, this is because there's so much more data that they have access to. And in fact, Google Voice Search had access to 230 billion, yes, that's billion with a B, words from user searches. That's a huge amount of data. I indicated that a lot of this is through artificial intelligence, so these systems are learning things and learning to recognize words through the data that they get by our use of those systems. Well, what about the 2010s? If we look at what has happened in, say, the last few years alone, we see a huge increase. IBM is a company that also does automatic speech recognition. Their engine is called Watson. It's used by thousands of companies, from computer software, healthcare, financial services companies. We mentioned Apple's Siri, which is on more than 700 million iPhones. Google Assistant is on more than 400 million devices. Microsoft's Cortana is on 400 million Windows 10 devices, and Amazon Alexa has thousands of hardware and software integrations for smart home use. This technology, automatic speech recognition, is really ubiquitous at this point. About 3 years ago, the chief economist with the Consumer Technology Association, they do the very large consumer electronics show, had this to say about automatic speech recognition. He said, we've seen more progress in this technology in the last 30 months, that was in 2017, than in the last 30 years. He's predicting that ultimately this kind of vocal computing where we interact with our voices is going to replace any traditional use of graphical user interfaces like our keyboard, touch screens, that sort of thing. So what are some common uses of ASR? Well, they're used in medical dictation, used in in-car system control. I can be in my car and I have to push a button, but once I push the button, I can say call home. The automatic speech recognition engine recognizes that and calls home for me. Journalists use it for dictation as well. You may have even read about some of these things being used for solving crimes. I think we've all had experience with telephone interactive voice response where you get a menu of items that you respond to by saying, maybe a number or what it is you actually want to do when you're calling. It's even used for pronunciation training and evaluation. We've already mentioned virtual voice assistants. It's in home automation. I could, with my Google Hub, tell it to turn on my lights, reduce the temperature in my home. And no surprise here, it's also used in video games. But what we're really here today to talk about is captioning for people who are hard of hearing, people who want to be able to have access to text. So captioning for a variety of purposes, including face-to-face conversation, telecommunications, accessing media that's both live and pre-recorded, presentations, and meetings that are both in-person and remote. And certainly in this time, remote meeting is really the course of the day. I think we all are experiencing that much more than we ever did before. So we're going to look at some examples of automatic speech recognition used for captioning for all of these different purposes. We're going to start by looking at a few things related to face-to-face conversation. And some of you might be familiar with a couple of the applications that I'm going to talk about. But one I'm not going to talk about that I think people might be familiar with is AVA. That's one application that uses automatic speech recognition. Another one that I think is about a year old that was developed by Google is Live Transcribe. The gentleman you see sitting in the picture, his name is Dmitry Konevsky. He's a Google research scientist. He's deaf since he was about 1 year old, and he's really responsible for much of the automatic speech recognition work that's been done related to Live Transcribe, and that's why you see him in this picture. Now, Live Transcribe is done by Google. Google also has developed the Android operating system, the operating system that most other phones use other than, of course, Apple iPhones. And Live Transcribe is actually only available on Android devices. I'm saying that in particular because some folks may have heard that Live Transcribe is now available for Apple devices or iOS devices. That's not actually true. Google has not come out with a version of Live Transcribe that works with Apple products. What has happened is there is another application that uses automatic speech recognition that also calls itself Live Transcribe, but is not the same as the Google application. That's something that's happened within the last week, and I thought I'd mention it because we have had a lot of questions about that. Another application that you might have heard of or be interested in exploring is something called Microsoft Translator. This application really is probably like what you might think it is. It's a translator from one language to another, but it also does English voice to English text. And it's for both Android and Apple. So if you want a solution or need a solution for iOS, then you might want to investigate Microsoft Translator. I would like to say that you don't have to write down any of these examples that I'm providing because there's going to be a resources document that's going to be posted along with the recording of this webinar. And that resources document is going to have a list of every application, every product that I mentioned, along with a link for you to follow in order to get more information about that particular item. So don't worry about writing anything down. It'll all be there for you afterward. We're going to move on to some examples of the use of automatic speech recognition in telecommunications. So some of you might be familiar with Caption telephone service, where you receive the captions of what your calling partner is saying. And actually, for the most part, except in one case, those captions are really provided through automatic speech recognition. Some people are not aware of this, but it's not done directly. There's someone, a communication assistant, a third party who's listening to what your calling partner is saying. They revoice or say, repeat what the calling partner has said, and then an automatic speech recognition engine produces captions and sends them to the Caption telephone or to an application on a wireless device. But there have been some recent developments. Caption is a company that has recently offered an ASR only option for Caption telephone service. They provide captioning using cart writers like we have today, live cart writers. But they now have an option for using automatic speech recognition. And if you subscribe to Hearing Life e-news from HLAA in the May 14th, 2020 issue, you might have seen that they reported on the FCC granting certification for the first time for a new ASR only caption telephone service. And this is through a company called Machine Genius. So we're moving into this realm of automatic speech recognition being used more directly for caption telephone service. In addition to that kind of relay service, there's also Skype. Some of you might use Skype. The nice thing is in addition to the audio, you can have an image, a video of the person you're talking with, so you can lip read. But in addition, you can actually turn on live captions and subtitles during your Skype call, and Skype is a product of Microsoft. Google is going to probably be entering this world of telecommunications as well. They've had a couple of blog posts about a product called Google Live Relay. It has yet to come out, at least to my knowledge, but it is something that you should be on the lookout for. It's going to be in that resources document that I mentioned. Let's move on to media, both live and pre-recorded. We're going to look at a few examples of that. And the first one is another Google product. This is called Live Caption. And it allows you on certain Android mobile devices, so certain phones, Pixel phones and some Samsung phones, to be able to use this offering so that you can access and display captions using automatic speech recognition for things like this video. This is a cooking video that's being displayed here in the picture. On the right-hand side, you can see the captions there. But it can also be used for podcasts, really any kind of media that you might want to access on your phone. We've talked a bit about a number of Google offerings in the realm of automatic speech recognition and providing captions, and they've really been developing a broad ecosystem of products that they've been bringing out on a regular basis for this particular kind of thing. Now, if you're into perhaps a little more of a techie kind of use of equipment, if you're really into that, you might even use Live Transcribe as an alternative to Live Caption. You can hook your phone up to your computer. You're going to use some of these audio jack connections. In this case, the person who sent me this picture is using their Rogers Select to listen. And they also have the sound from this podcast piped directly to their cell phone, and they're reading the captions off of this. This is from a set of technical diagrams that can be accessed about speech-to-text technologies, and it's a group of deaf scientists who put this together. Again, this is included in that resource document I talked about, so please don't worry about trying to write down that link. I put this slide in because I think it's important, if you're going to be doing direct connections between devices, that you become familiar with the types of connections you need, the types of connectors and audio jacks or other kinds of connectors that are important for making that connection work. And this is just an example of what was used in the previous slide to connect the phone to the computer audio. Do you need to have a direct connection? You don't need to. You could actually have your phone with Live Transcribe held to the speakers of your computer. It's simply that the audio is likely not to be as good as if you have a direct connection. Now, I often give presentations, so, and I'm sure there are people in the audience who do as well. We're going to talk about a couple of ways that you can use automatic speech recognition to provide captions during presentations. One is by using Microsoft PowerPoint. So it has a really simple interface that you can click on and select to use captions. The one caveat, and this is something we'll talk about a little later under considerations for using this kind of technology, is that you have to have a particular version of Microsoft PowerPoint in order for this to work. Most applications, software of this type that use automatic speech recognition will provide for you information on the requirements, like the version of the software that's needed, or the version of an operating system that might be needed, the type of, for example, headphones that a company may suggest. So in this case, Microsoft actually has a list of headsets that they recommend for using their automatic speech recognition product when you're doing PowerPoint presentations. Another example of having automatic speech recognition captions for presentations is through Google Slides. Again, it's a very simple interface. You can see it right here. You're basically just selecting that you want to show closed captions, and the captions appear automatically. So it's pretty seamless, and you can give Google Slides a try. This is, of course, also on that resources document that you'll be having access to. I'm going to move on to meetings. Hot topic, not so much in person, of course, these days, but certainly remotely. And I have a couple of examples of technology that uses automatic speech recognition that can assist during meetings. I happen to use, on a fairly regular basis, Otter. It's certainly not the only web-based captioner out there. There's another application or web-based product called Web Captioner that's similar to Otter, although most companies have ways of distinguishing themselves, and part of your decision-making process about what you might use or decide to select if you're going to use one of these offerings is to figure out what exactly you need the product to do. In this case, I use this for meetings that I have. The nice thing about Otter for my purposes is that I'm able to record the entire meeting. I have the audio recording as well as the automatic speech recognition captions that are produced. Otter has learned over time who I am, so you can see my name, Linda, there, along with another person who I meet with, Kathy. So over time, Otter has learned to recognize and identify the speakers, and that's something that's very nice for me. I can go through and I can actually edit these transcripts right online. That's also useful for my meeting purposes. But the point is that it does serve some very important purposes for my needs. Now you can actually also, if you're having an in-person meeting and you want to display captions, you can use Live Transcribe or Microsoft Translator and display those captions from your phone onto some larger device like a TV. You can use screen mirroring to display those, and that requires a wired connection. It's a USB-C connection from the phone to an HDMI connection on the TV. So these connections and knowing what they are is important because you'll want to know that in advance of trying to set up anything like this for an in-person meeting that you might have in the future, but it is certainly another option. Once again, another reminder that if you're going to do that kind of connection between devices, that it's always important to know what connectors you need. In this case, I mentioned a USB connector along with an HDMI connector for the example that I provided. It's possible that another connection might work. I also use Apple products, so I have an Apple TV and I can use something called AirPlay to transmit the captions that might be on my iPhone from something like Microsoft Translator to a TV. So there are a whole variety of ways that you can accomplish providing some of these captions on larger screens. Now, video conference meetings. So I think we're all having a lot of these lately. This picture shows an example of something, of the meetings that I actually participate in. That's me in the upper left-hand corner. Lisa's next to me. We're having a video conference meeting with some colleagues who are actually in various parts of the country. And we use GoToMeeting in this case. That's what I have access to. But we also want to be able to provide captions for the folks who need them. And so I'm using Otter for that. I place the GoToMeeting window and the Otter window side by side on my screen so I can see the participants' faces as well as the transcription that happens. I am in control of setting up Otter, and the nice thing, something that's important as that I need for my meetings is to be able to share that caption screen, and Otter provides me that. On the Otter screen, you'll see a small little person at the bottom, a little icon with a plus sign next to it. I can click on that, get a link, copy it, and email it to the people in the meeting. So if they click on that link, they can see the same captions that I'm seeing through Otter, and that's something that is important for the meetings that I'm in. Now, another recent, I think, entrant, relatively recent entrant to this idea of having video conferencing meetings along with captioning is something called Google Meet. Some of you might have tried this. Google Meet is a little bit different because the captions, the automatic speech recognition captions, are integrated into Google Meet. What I described previously was using GoToMeeting, one application, along with a second application, Otter, and putting those applications side by side. Google Meet does not require that. The automatic speech recognition captions are actually integrated into Google Meet, and it's a click of the button. It shows who is speaking, and these are a couple of my graduate students that I work with, so they were happy to have their picture used today, which I thought was really nice. I know a lot of people are really interested in remote meetings, And I wanted to let folks know who are on the webinar to look for a joint release of some documents along with ASL video this Friday. And this release is going to be by the research center that I co-direct, a large number of consumer organizations and other advocates. And this, these documents and this video is going to address remote workplace communication access. And I think it's going to be really useful for folks. So keep an eye out for the release of that information this coming Friday. Now, I've talked a little bit about and mentioned that we have really a lot of options where automatic speech recognition is used to provide captions to meet communication needs. But there are so many offerings that you really need to figure out how you're going to make a choice about what you want to use. It's always important to try things, but I think it's also important to consider performance and the features and functions that you want this kind of technology to provide for you. So I made a list here, and in terms of performance, I think the two metrics that we consider most often is accuracy. Are the captions correct? And how long after someone speaks do those captions appear? And so those are two very important performance metrics that I think we all think about. But there are other features and functions that if you're thinking about using an automatic speech recognition engine to get captions, there are other things to consider. Whether or not it does speaker identification, if that's important for your need. Does it provide punctuation? There are also things like non-speech information that you might want to have access to, depending on the use that you have for those ASR captions. Caption size and font and location can be really important. The number of lines of text and how things scroll can be something that someone really wants to consider. And probably even more importantly is whether or not there are user controls for adjusting those things. So these are all kinds of features and functions you want to think about. Saving, editing, printing transcripts for me was something important in meetings I have. And then specialized vocabulary. If you happen to be a classroom teacher and you're using automatic speech recognition, you might be able to actually use specialized vocabulary and have that as part of the automatic speech recognition engine. And so you may want to specifically look for something like that. There are going to be other things than what I have listed here. One thing I mentioned previously in my own use of Otter is that I needed a way to easily share that caption screen in a meeting, and Otter gave me that flexibility. So these are all the kinds of things that you will probably want to think about if you decide you want to try automatic speech recognition and have a choice of what it is you'd like to select. Now, I thought it might be interesting to folks to see an actual transcript. This is from a transcript that was generated by automatic speech recognition of a podcast. This is a Hidden Brain commencement address. I happen to really love Hidden Brain on NPR. This is just a segment. So there are 273 words here on the screen and 14 errors for this particular segment of the podcast. I didn't select this for any particular reason. My son is graduating from college, and so this was something that sort of piqued my interest. So I just thought I'd try it and see what the result was. And you can see that So 14 errors out of 273 words is about 95% words correct. I am in no way suggesting that this is the kind of result that you're going to see every time you use automatic speech recognition. This is one example. And so you really need to try whatever engine you're interested in, whatever automatic speech recognition product you might be interested in, to see if its performance meets your needs. Automatic speech recognition can make some unusual errors. I think different than what you will see with errors that might occur with human captioners. This next one in particular, where it says "it's up early," is an interesting error. It's talking about a great violinist. Someone who is familiar with violinists might actually be able to guess who this was supposed to be, but obviously "it's up early" is not a name. It was Itzhak Perlman. I'm just gonna click over some of these other errors so you can see what it really should have been. And then we're gonna look down here at the last two errors below where it says Maya has since competed. That was actually the word completed. I didn't even notice the error originally until I was doing the calculation. And then a Rhodes Scholarship. This is a little more predictable because Rhodes Scholarship sounds like road. But I just wanted to give you a quick example of accuracy. Now, we also talked a little bit about latency. That's when those captions actually show up. So Carla, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and let me play this video for folks.
Okay, hang on one second, Linda. I'm going to go ahead and enable it. Okay, 1 second.
Sure, thank you. So this is another Hidden Brain episode that I happened to just take a video of. I was using Otter again here. And I thought it might be interesting for those of you who haven't seen automatic speech recognition work to actually see a video of how quickly or slowly, as the case may be, these captions appear. So Carla, can I play now?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, this is 45-second clip. Uh-oh. There we are.
Many people believe the 1918 outbreak in the United States first began at an army camp in Kansas. Tell me about Camp Funston.
Well, Camp Funston was one of many places in the United States where American soldiers were training for the First World War. And that spring, they experienced a somewhat unusual example of influenza. And as it traveled through the army camps, a few pathologists noticed that there was something unusual. The postmortem exams of the victims showed a kind of soggy lung. But in general, most Americans didn't notice it, and this first wave, with its origins in Kansas, would pass the United States almost entirely unnoticed, except by a few military epidemiologists.
So that's the example. I wanted you to get a sense of just how quickly or slowly you thought those captions were appearing. Obviously, there were errors there. And in fact, you probably saw some of the words adjusting after the fact. That is also something that occurs. But I just wanted to play that as an example so you could get a sense of what the latency, at least for this particular example, looked like.
And you have the
There we go. Well, one reason that you might have poor captions, just like a live human transcriber, someone who's doing CART, a CART writer might have difficulty is that there may be some issues with the actual speech that they're listening to. And GIGO is just a computing acronym that means garbage in, garbage out. But essentially what it's saying is that if there is incorrect or poor quality input, in this case, the audio is poor quality, it will produce something faulty on the output. So what kind of problems does automatic speech recognition encounter that might produce errors? Well, one of them is really just the speaker characteristics, the speech clarity of the speaker, the rate of their speech, whether their speech is accented. If you have two speakers, you can have overlapping speech. If you're listening to telephonic speech over something over the telephone, the quality can be poor. Coming over the telephone, that can have an impact. The location of the microphone can be problematic, as well as noise in the environment. So all of these things can impact the quality of the captions that are produced. I wanted to mention just quickly that in terms of speech clarity, there are some folks who have difficulty producing clear speech, but there's actually a project called Project Euphonia that is looking to collect data for people who have difficult to understand speech so that automatic speech recognition engines actually improve their accuracy for speech clarity in that particular speaker characteristic. Some other considerations that I think are important. We've already talked about some of these a little bit, but whenever you're making a decision about product, device, software that you're going to use, you have to think about compatibility of the devices you have or the software with what you're going to use. And one example of that we already talked about, and that was that Live Transcribe, Google's Live Transcribe, is only available for Android devices and not for Apple or iOS devices. So that's an example of the kind of compatibility you have to be aware of. Same is true for the comment we made previously about Microsoft PowerPoint, that only particular versions of Microsoft PowerPoint are capable of providing automatic speech recognition. Sometimes there is a cost to using the software applications or any of the services. Cost, of course, has to always be a consideration. And sometimes there are other services or equipment that's needed. An example of another service is, of course, the internet. All of these services are typically go through the internet. They're cloud services almost always, but not exclusively. So you actually have to make sure that you have some sort of connection. We talked about some equipment that might be needed if you want to make connections between devices. So that's a consideration. Built-in tools that you want or need. I talked about the built-in tool for me of being able to share that link to the captions that was generated on the automatic speech recognition application I was using. Also, these kind of things are rather computationally intense, and so I always like to make sure that whatever I'm using, for example, on my phone, I either have fully charged my phone or I can plug my phone in. And of course, if they're cloud-based, it means they require an internet connection. So I was giving this particular talk not long ago at a public library and wanting to give a demonstration of Microsoft PowerPoint's automatic speech recognition captions. I wasn't able to because the internet connection in that public library did not permit me to do that. It was not good enough to actually access that service. And of course, finally, anything that goes over the internet and is cloud-based, there are privacy and security concerns. Almost everyone encrypts the data as it goes to the cloud or goes over the internet. but that doesn't mean that there aren't privacy and security concerns that you want to be aware of. You should read the policies that people have for those. And so that gets me to my final thought, which is, of course, always read the product information, the manuals. There's online help and tutorials, many of them extremely good, that you can use. Provide feedback. Many applications will have a way to provide feedback and report problems. Do so. Sometimes it can be frustrating and take a lot of time, but it is important to send those. And have patience for yourself and the learning process. None of these things can someone go in and use immediately. Some are easier than others, but there's always a learning process no matter what you're using. And don't be afraid to try and try again. Even have a buddy that you work with if there's something in particular, some automatic speech recognition caption product that you'd like to try. Have a buddy to work on it with, and always expect the inevitable learning curve. There's always something to be learned, even when you think you've pretty much got things down. They'll come out with a new version of the software and there'll be something new that you need to learn. So I'm going to remind you that you're going to get a resources document that covers all the information that we had in website links. And now I'm going to move to questions. So it's going to take me just a minute to take a look at the questions that have been coming through. So the first question is from Jack. It says, I love live transcribing app for Android phone. Is there any app that is equal or as good as live transcribe for iPhone? So I think that there are actually a number of applications. Whether something's as good as live transcribe, I think is something that is maybe in part up to the individual person. So I'm not sure that I can give you an actual answer. I tend to look at reviews on the App Store to see what has come up. And it's possible that in the future, Google will produce live transcribe for iOS. They definitely know that people are interested in having that compatibility. Bruce asks, has anyone come up with a way to use ASR with Zoom? And yes, they certainly have, and it's through Otter, the Otter application, the web-based application that I mentioned. It's also an app that you can download on your phone. So definitely Zoom and Otter have worked together in order to provide automatic speech recognition there. There are some caveats, of course, and that has to do with, I believe, the cost factor. So what level of the Zoom subscription you might need, along with any other requirements for the Otter product as well, which has different levels of subscription. So Myrna asks, how do we add an app with ASR to a cell phone? Well, in many cases, and for example, if we use Live Transcribe as the example, even Microsoft Translator, you simply go to the App Store, either the Google Play Store or the Apple App Store, and you download it like you would any other application to your phone. And then you can start using it. But again, please remember to always read the information about the application and what the producer developer has provided through the Play Store or the Apple Store.
Linda, I just want to remind you that you have about 5 more minutes, okay?
Okay, thanks so much. So I have a comment here from Ed. He's wondering if I could comment on latency and group delay in speech recognition systems. He thinks that the problem is common to both speech recognition and hearing aid design. It shows up in both, especially with speakers who have high syllabic rates in speech. It is one weak point in my otherwise useful hearing aid. With such speakers, volume is fine, but understanding is diminished. So I'm going to talk about latency really in two ways. I gave you a demonstration of one app for one podcast so you could see the latency. Latency is pretty short for many speech recognition engines. However, there are ways that a developer can play with how accurate they want something and how delayed they want those captions to show up. So there's somewhat of a trade-off there. The quicker the captions appear, likely accuracy will be compromised. If you want better caption accuracy, that may require a little longer delay. So there are ways that those two concepts, accuracy and latency, trade off for one another with automatic speech recognition. But I think that, and you might be talking about something that's called audio-visual synchrony as well. So if we are both hearing and lip reading and seeing captions, how those different streams of information, the auditory, the visual for lip reading, the visual through captions, how they all come together to support speech understanding can be compromised if one of them is out of sync with the other. I don't know of very many measurements or people who have studied latency, for example, that much, so I don't have any comment necessarily on what you might see generally out there for all these applications, but it's definitely something to consider. And I have about 2 minutes, so I'm going to look at the next question. This is from Ronnie. She said, just yesterday, Sherry Ebert said that Zoom is finally considering making captions free for all, just as Google Meet finally agreed to do a few weeks ago. Do you have any news regarding this new development? Is there hope that Zoom will make captions free for all, especially since the COVID-19 situation development? So I can say that I don't know. I don't know whether this will happen or not. I do know that companies like Zoom have made adjustments to their product offerings and pricing for different groups. So they've changed their pricing, for example, for educators. So it wouldn't surprise me if there were some adjustments to Zoom. I simply don't know about them. And I think, Carla, that may be the last question that I can get to.
Okay, Linda, thank you. Your presentation was just amazingly informative. I have to apologize to everyone that we can't address everyone's question, but as Linda mentioned, we will be posting a document with questions that were posted on the question and answer board. So we will try to address those questions at a later time. I have to thank Linda for her informative and very thorough presentation today. ASR is a very hot topic for our members and our chapters, and we really appreciate you taking the time to inform us today. I need to thank Deanna for her wonderful cart services today. The webinar will be posted to the HLA website. Please check HLA website for future webinars and events. Also check our Experience HLA that's coming this June. And I think that I just want to share one last slide with you all. This is Linda's email. If you wish to reach her, please, that information will be probably provided in her document that she will provide to us later on to be posted with the webinar as well. I thank you all for joining today, and I hope you all stay safe and be well, and we will look forward to seeing you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.